Right. I would like to introduce our lifelong learning speaker for today, Rebecca Sande. Rebecca Sande is a wife, mom to 6 kids, aged 24 to 10. She's an author and a catechist, currently preparing 9th graders for confirmation in her home parish of St. Francis of Assisi in Jefferson. Her roots are in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. However, she's lived in the Diocese of Madison for nearly 30 years. Rebecca was a founding board member of Pro-Life Wisconsin and now spends her days at the state capitol since re-entering the work world 3 years ago as a legislative assistant in the state assembly, where she met her husband, Matt, more than 25 years ago. She enjoys reading to her kids, baking, hiking, and celebrating the liturgical year. Previously, her free time was spent explaining why a family dog was not a good idea. Now it's spent training a cute little dachshund puppy named Pretzel. So thank you, Rebecca, for being here today. She gave you a mic. Perfect. I really appreciate you being with us. I want to put in a little plug for our next lifelong learning speaker, Father Thomas Mary. From Holy Hill. His presentation will be on March 3rd at 11 a.m., and he'll be talking about sacramentals. So that's everything from holy water, holy oil, blessed salts, medals, scapulars, so much more. This is a presentation that is going to be for the record books. I can guarantee you that. He has given me some insight into all of what he's going to bring and demonstrate, and you do not want to miss this. He also says bring your own salt and olive oil if you would like to have blessed salt and blessed oil. He will do that for you. It can be table salt, it can be sea salt, not garlic salt or seasoned salt. I mean, this is a sacramental. This is not a flavor contest. But you're welcome to bring those if you would like to have them blessed, and he'll explain all the significance behind it. So with that, Rebecca, thank you so much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Grace Marie. Is that okay? Can you hear that all right? Thank you. Well, happy Lent, everyone. Is that a thing to say? It's a joy to be with you this morning and offer some reflections as we embark on these 40 days of Lent. It's really an encouragement for me to be here with you, and I hope that you are encouraged as well. I'm going to stick kind of close to my notes, if that's all right. It's just easier in that way. I don't wander off track. Well, I'm here today by a mutual friend of Grace Marie's and mine, Anne Auger. You may have heard her speak before. Anne is a great speaker. She's a wonderfully funny speaker. And I've told her that she reminds me of a modern Irma Bombeck. And if you're of a certain age, you know who that is. Anne doesn't. So she had to look her up. But if you ever get to hear her speak, you're in for a treat. She definitely sees the lighter side of life. And I appreciate people who see that side and can roll with it. So Anne spoke at our parish a while back about using the gifts that God has given you for the greater glory of God, building up the kingdom and not just keeping your gifts and talents to yourself. And her talk inspired me to take up a practice I'd largely given up over the course of the years, which was public speaking. I'd done quite a bit before I was married and a little bit during and after, but then life just got busy and I'm like, no time for that, and don't know that that's something I should be doing right now. But anyway, that's what brought me here. So thank you to Anne. So today we're talking about detachment and charity. And Grace Marie said, we were talking about a few different topics that we might be able to talk about. She's like, that would be great for Lent. We'll just be getting into Lent. Detachment would be a great thing. So I'll share a story. Detachment and I have been friends for many years, almost 20 years, as a matter of fact. 20 years ago this May, I was sitting next to my mom on her bed in the home I grew up in. My third baby was 6 months old, and her 2 older brothers were 4 and 2. I was a busy, fairly postpartum mom, and I was home with my mom, who was getting chemotherapy and radiation for brain cancer. So there, we were sitting on her bed. She was sick, weak, tired, bloated from steroids, cranky, and dependent. At that moment, I was just happy to be next to her, being her daughter, not her caregiver, not a mom to toddlers or a newborn, but her daughter. Propped up with pillows behind our backs, I laid my head on her shoulder. Straight ahead outside the window was a birch tree, And I remember just looking at it. In that quiet moment, I thought about how sick my mom was and how entirely possible it was that she might not actually be with me on this earth much longer. That tree, in fact, would likely be here much longer than my mom, or me for that matter, and I actually felt a bit jealous of it. As I sat next to this most loved mom in that quiet moment, my head on her shoulder, my stomach tightened and grief washed over me. It welled up in my eyes and spilled down in a hot torrent of tears. I did not move. I did not want her to feel me crying. I would not and could not let her know this sadness. We were still praying for and expecting a miracle. Optimism was always a thing in our house growing up. So as this disease gained more and more ground with my mom, we really didn't talk about death or dying. The disease was a challenge, according to her oncologist, and that's the word we stuck with. Challenges could be overcome. I was praying so hard for her complete healing. Our family was praying. Her coworkers at Graymere Preschool were praying. Friends were praying, and friends of friends were praying, all for a miracle I knew God could grant. I sent out a brochure to everyone I knew, telling them the situation and asking for prayers. We organized a healing mass for her, here actually at Holy Hill, in fact. And yet, a few weeks after I'd cried those hot tears leaning on her shoulder, my brother and I looked at hospices, and my dad and my sister went to the cemetery to purchase a plot. 2 days after her 57th birthday, my mom passed away peacefully. I don't think I even talked to my mom about dying until a few days before she passed. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the many gifts and graces we all experienced in the last months of my mom's life. There was even a mountaintop experience the day Father Tate came to anoint my mom, hear her last confession, and administer viaticum. As you can imagine, I loved my mom a lot. Did I love her to the extent that God ever had to fight for first place in my heart? I don't know, because not only was she my biological mom, my friend, my counselor, cheerleader, the best babysitter to my kids, she was also my spiritual mom. She had only led me to know, love, and serve the Lord, so I never really questioned that. God had not answered our prayers for a complete healing, which is what our family all wanted most in the world. My mom had been taken home, and I was detached from one of the dearest loves I ever knew. Indeed, as I told my brother a few months after she died, I gained the gift of detachment. After my mom died, I knew I needed to draw closer to the Lord and his mother, Mary. I was a spiritual orphan. I ran to our Lord and to his mother for comfort and direction, and thank God I did. So what is detachment? How do we detach? Why should we be detached? I'll answer that here, actually. It's so that we can attach ourselves more closely and more firmly to God. What isn't detachment? Well, the word detachment can often have a negative connotation. It might suggest a person who is aloof or depressed, unable or willing to engage themselves in a person or a conversation or a project. This is not the kind of detachment we're talking about. Rather, detachment, in the sense of the word I am talking about, is related to the cardinal virtue of temperance. It means that we have a healthy impartiality, a distancing, an indifference. As you can imagine, this can be a hard virtue to practice. We're very attached to things. I was very attached to my mom. And we can be attached not only to bad things, bad habits, but good things, things that can lead us towards God. But I might be getting ahead of myself. St. Paul describes detachment perfectly in his letter to the Philippians. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 to 13, he says, I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, I heard that verse this morning on the radio. I don't remember what I was listening to, maybe Relevant Radio, but I heard that verse, and I had never realized that that popular verse, you see it on plaques, and it's always kind of just taken in of itself, was followed, that verse about St. Paul being content in want or in need. And I just think that's really a nice connection to make, that when he is talking about, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, he is talking right after expressing his detachment from the world. So it's not a virtue that we really need to be afraid of when we think about detaching ourselves from things, but it's something that we should realize gives us strength. It's such a great virtue for the Lenten season. You know, we talk about the 3 pillars of Lent: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And these all certainly require detachment. Think about it. If you're praying more, you may be giving up some sleep or some entertainment in your time. You have to detach from those things. If you're fasting, you have to distance yourself from the sweetener in your coffee, or coffee altogether, or chocolate, or dessert, or some other comfort and indulgence. And almsgiving, the 3rd traditional pillar of Lent, requires us to detach from material goods and give away what we have for the benefit of another person. These are all ways we make room in our hearts and in our lives for God. Interestingly, a few weeks before Lent, the church had offered us kind of a remote preparation, if you will, on detachment. And I'd like to look back on this just a little bit. Monday of the 4th week of Ordinary Time, both readings offered great reflection on the virtue of detachment. And if you'll indulge me, I want to read to you from the 2nd book of Samuel. It's a good story, so hopefully you'll stick with me here. 2 Samuel chapter 15. An informant came to David with the report, "The children of Israel have transferred their loyalty to Absalom." At this, David said to all his servants who were with him in Jerusalem, "Up, let us take flight, or none of us will escape from Absalom. Leave quickly, let he hurry and overtake us, then visit disaster upon us and put the city to the sword." As David went up the Mount of Olives, he wept without ceasing. His head was covered, and he was walking barefoot. All those who were with him also had their heads covered and were weeping as they went. As David was approaching Bahurim, a man named Shimei, the son of Gera, of the same clan as Saul's family, was coming out of the place, cursing as he came. He threw stones at David and at all the king's officers, even though all the soldiers, including the royal guard, were on David's right and left. Shimei was saying as he cursed, "Away, away, you murderous and wicked man. The Lord has requited you for all the bloodshed in the family of Saul, in whose stead you became king. And the Lord has given over the kingdom to your son, Absalom. And now you suffer ruin because you are a murderer." Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord, the king? Let me go over, please, and lop off his head." But the king replied, "What business is it of mine or of yours, sons of Zeruiah, that he curses? Suppose the Lord has told him to curse David. Who then will dare to say, 'Why are you doing this?'" Then the king said to Abishai and to all his servants, "If my own son, who came from my loins, is seeking my life, how much more might this Benjaminite do so? Let him alone, let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. Perhaps the Lord will look upon my affliction and make it up to me with benefits for the curses he is uttering this day." David and his men continued on the road while Shimei kept abreast of them on the hillside, all the while cursing and throwing stones and dirt as he went. Oh my goodness. Wow, what a story. I mean, can you imagine King David? Just thinking about that. You know, we have so many natural crosses, sorrows that come to us, illness or a reversal of fortune or whatnot. I think one of the most difficult circumstances, and those of you who have adult children might know, if you've ever experienced a child leaving the faith or betraying you or any sort of like disruption in that close relationship with your own child. That's hard. That's what happened to David. His son, Absalom, his dearly beloved son, turned against him, turned his men against him, and was seeking to destroy his own city, his own father's city. That's tough. That's tough. He is seeking his life, and David is fleeing his own city. So there's that. There's that to be detached from. That there's that pain and that pain and that suffering. He's being accosted by this man. He's the king, and he has his soldiers on either side of him, and he has them yelling at him, screaming at him, accosting him, throwing dirt and stones at him. That might be a little humbling. This Shimei is saying to him, this is the Lord who is doing this to you. This is your punishment. And then David does something very remarkable. To his men who want to defend him, he says, no. What if the Lord is telling him to do this? Is it really my place to stop him from cursing me? I have done many bad things. I have done bad things, and perhaps this is what the Lord is giving to me to expiate my sins, essentially. Perhaps the Lord will look upon my affliction and make it up to me with benefits for the curses he is uttering this day. So talk about a reaction of humility. That's something. So way back on the Monday of the fourth week of Ordinary Time, that was the first reading. And then we had this, the Gospel. The Gospel was from Mark. And I won't read the entire passage to you, but the scene is when Jesus crosses over the lake to where the Gerasenes live. And there had been a man who was possessed by a legion of demons. And the people he's looking for help. And so the demons address Jesus and say to him, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, do not torment me." And so, as you know, there was a large herd of swine feeding there on the hillside, and they pleaded with him, the demons pleaded with Jesus, "Send us into the swine and let us enter them." And so Jesus let them, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd of about 2,000 rushed down a steep bank into the sea where they were drowned. Now the swineherds ran away. They reported the incident in the town and throughout the countryside, and the people all came out to see what had happened. As they approached Jesus, they caught sight of the man who had been possessed by legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind, and they were seized with fear. Those who witnessed the incident explained to them what had happened to the possessed man and to the swine. Then they began to beg him to leave their district. How interesting to think about that reaction. Here they witnessed something imaginably powerful. A man had been possessed by demons. The demons had been cast out by Jesus and taken and put into the swine, and the swine went and ran themselves over a cliff into the water, and the man was healed. He was in his right mind. He was healed of that possession. And the people said, "Please leave." Where were their hearts? What an interesting reaction, isn't it? Like, they were quite attached to their swine. They would have rather had those 2,000 swine, which I'm not saying was not a considerable amount of income and resources for their economy, for those people who were in charge of those animals. But it's very clear that they much rather would have had the swine than the man being healed. So clearly they're not quite getting it. Jesus is in their midst, and they're saying, "Please go away. Please leave us." I don't know if any of you have ever heard In Conversation with God. They offer fabulous points for meditation. And there were some points for meditation on this gospel. And I just want to kind of go through some of those meditation points with you. Jesus did leave. He did leave. He will do what we ask him to do. But it was a sad condition that those people were in asking God to leave them. So it's important that we say to the Lord very often, please keep me faithful to your teaching and never let me be parted from you. It truly is better to be with Christ and have nothing than to have all the treasures of the world and not have Christ. Whom else would we go to? The Lord has the words of eternal life. The people, the Gerasenes, should have fallen down in wonder and adoration. They were unable to understand who was there, and not recognizing Jesus was this people's greatest folly. Now, for us, there are many ways of asking Jesus to leave our neighborhood and to leave our lives, maybe more subtly. Today, there might be something that we experience as a less conspicuous, but a civil death. You know, it could be something like restrictions on our personal freedom. Would we sacrifice our honor, our fortune? Would we sacrifice these things to remain with God? Those are things to consider as we're thinking about what sorts of things we should or may need to detach from. You cannot serve two masters. We can't focus on earthly goods. We know how easily earthly goods lead to more and more self-satisfaction, comfort, luxury, and giving in to our whims. So we really need to make sure that our hearts are really and truly only for God. Detachment paradoxically makes life delightful. We have to remain vigilant and not fall into that spirit of comfort. Sometimes we can create superfluous needs. Sometimes the TV or social media or companies can create superfluous needs. Like, you need this water bottle. You need this food. You need this brand of clothing. Are we prepared to cast away anything that prevents us from coming close to Christ? Maybe this Lent we can reflect on that. Let us never ask Jesus to leave. So that first passage addresses worldly sorrow, and the second passage points out the value of a human being in the eyes of God. It gives us the vision we need to look upon our sorrows, our losses, our challenges, our attachments, in a way that not only detaches us from pain, because we can easily persuade ourselves that things don't matter because God has it all in control, but that takes that pain and points it to God for the greater good of ourselves and of others, which is a love that goes by the name of charity. So by that, just to be clear, I'm just talking about sometimes in order to distance ourselves from pain, because we're human creatures, we want to be happy, we don't want to experience pain. The virtue of detachment can be a kind of a way to say, well, I don't really care, even if you do care. We can use detachment maybe as a tool to distance ourselves from something that we can't fix or something that's unpleasant and we can't change it. And so it can be used sort of as that way that we mentally get around that and say, well, I don't really care about it as much. Maybe it's not something that we should care about, but maybe it's something that we should care about. And maybe instead of, stepping back and not fighting or not working for a solution, we can say to ourselves, well, I'm just detached. And that kind of goes back to that unhealthy detachment. And that's something that we want to be thoughtful and aware of when we're thinking about this virtue of detachment and practicing it. God often doesn't take what he asks us to give. That should be a comfort. I'll just say that again. God often doesn't take what he asks us to give. Look at Abraham and Isaac. He asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, and Abraham said yes. But of course, we know that in the end, God did not ask that of him. He simply wanted to know where Abraham's heart was. And many times that's what he's asking of us. He just wants to know where our hearts are. So again, it's one of those virtues where it can seem very, very hard. But I would remind us that it may not be as hard as we think, because God just wants to know where our hearts are, and he will be with us when he asks for those things that he really does call us to sacrifice, whether it's someone that you've lost or a situation that you can't fix or whatever the case may be. So why all of this detachment anyway? What's the use of it? Is it just because we like to flog ourselves? No, not at all. To realize the point of this is to realize that all is to be used for the goodness of God and for the advancement of his kingdom. Again, he doesn't call us to detach just for the sake of it. He calls us to detach so that we can more closely attach to him, so that we can use our gifts and talents the best way possible for the furthering of his kingdom. So I just finished up listening to the Catechism in a Year with Father Mike. Has anybody listened to Bible of a Year, Catechism in a Year? Amazing. I have a commute time. That's the only way I've got it done is in the car. So that's my commute time. But it's wonderful, and I'm listening to it again. Like not every day, but it's really a gift. Right off the bat, in Chapter 1, Article 1 of the Catechism, the Church speaks to the implications of faith in one God, and I'm just going to quickly read that to you. All right, in chapter 226, our faith in God, what are the implications? One of the implications of our faith in God means making good use of created things. Faith in God, the only one, leads us to use everything that is not God only insofar as it brings us closer to him, and to detach ourselves from it in so far as it turns us away from him. And then there's a prayer. My Lord and my God, take from me everything that distances me from you. My Lord and my God, give me everything that brings me closer to you. My Lord and my God, detach me from myself to give my all to you. Faith in God means trusting in God in every circumstance, even in adversity. A prayer of St. Teresa of Jesus wonderfully expresses this trust. Let nothing trouble you. Let nothing frighten you. Everything passes. God never changes. Patience obtains all. Whoever has God wants for nothing. God alone is enough. That is one of my favorite prayers. In fact, when I read that, it reminded me, my husband and I actually had that printed in our wedding brochure. So we're to attach ourselves, but that's really, really hard. Can we get a little more guidance on this? How do we, what can we love so much to effectively detach ourselves from everything, even ourselves? Isn't that just impossible? Well, one of my favorite saints is Saint Teresa of Lisieux. And I'm the oldest in my family. I'm the oldest of four, and I've always considered her my big sister. And she's just so real and so wise, and I've gained so much from her. And she speaks of something totally opposite of detachment, but yet it hooks us in, and it's one of the solutions to the problem of how we can do this. She speaks of the great desire we must keep kindled in our hearts to love God and to be holy. She writes, in order to give Jesus love for love, we must be souls of desire. Nothing great ever comes about without great desires. They are the mainspring, the driving force. And you, how sad it would be if you were merely to creep along in indifference. Routine, terrible routine, is the daughter of apathy. In order to rise out of mediocrity and lukewarmness, renew your desires. So that's really important. And as we move through Lent towards Easter, keep in mind where we're going. Keep in mind, heaven is our eternal destination. God has a place planned for each of us. Here on earth, He has a job for us to do. He has a mission. We belong to him. He will give us everything we need to fulfill our mission. And he asks us to unite ourselves very, very closely to him to get there. And one of the greatest gifts that he gives to help us get there is suffering. We want to be like Christ. He took up his cross. We all have to take up our cross. We all have our crosses. St. Therese goes on about this a little bit. She says, and I insist, do not ever stop at the isolated idea of expiation by the cross without going further. Whether or not you are given the cross in order to expiate, it is always given in love. It is always presented by Jesus in a design of love. We see the cross as reparation, but not enough as preparation. Remember David in the first reading? He did not know the cross was the way to gain heaven, a gift of the Lord that is not only for the expiation of our own sins, but a tender gift we can use to win souls for Christ. How amazing. So David, when he was suffering, he was accepting that suffering and using it, maybe thinking, well, maybe the Lord will think well of me if I accept this suffering. But as Christians, we can take our suffering beyond that. We can go beyond and know that the cross, our sufferings, are something that Jesus used and uses today to win souls. And that's something we need to really, really think about and to take seriously and to renew our desires to win souls. First of all, our own souls for heaven, but then also those of people we love and anyone else who God puts in our path. We have a mission to do that. We really are in a spiritual battle. I see it at work. I work at the Capitol, and oh my goodness, there's a reason I don't watch the news and don't read the newspaper at home. Some of the issues that we are facing as a nation, of course, and as a state are just truly mind-boggling. Things are changing very, very fast in society. And I remember even 10 years ago feeling like I had whiplash raising my kids. Like, okay, I grew up here, this is the life I grew up in, this is how the world was, and like, holy cow, things have changed. We are faced with issues that we laughed at when we were kids. If you would have told me that, we would be dealing with artificial intelligence, human trafficking, boys and girls not knowing if they're boys and girls, I would have laughed and said, that's crazy. That's maybe, 50, 100 years down the road. But it has come quickly. And, so many issues just with the technological age that we're living in. This is no time to be passive. It is no time to just sit back. There is a spiritual battle going on for souls, and we're being called. We're being called to mitigate the losses. So as you practice this virtue of detachment and think about where we are, it's kind of something I would liken to be first responders. I am not a first responder, but my goodness, I am so grateful for those people who are willing to answer the 911 phone call, to go into a burning building, to go into a situation where there is clear and present danger, and to know what to do. And to be able to put their feelings aside, to compartmentalize, to think clearly, to think quickly, and to bring people out of really bad situations. Those are natural circumstances. But we know that there are supernatural circumstances that we need to be working on as well and fighting for as well. So I want you to think about that as you go through Lent, as we journey towards Easter. Think about your particular gifts, your particular charisms, and how God is calling you today, this Lent, to put aside whatever you might be attached to. Maybe it's something that's objectively not so great, Maybe it's something that's just a good, but it's preventing you from doing what God is actually calling you to do. So reflect on that. And then attack. Attack this Lent spiritually. Dig down. Stay faithful to your prayers. Stay faithful to your fasting. Be generous in your almsgiving. And know that it matters. And I want to make sure that I'm linking this to the second theme of the talk today, which is charity. It's important that we do all things in love. And by emptying ourselves of those attachments, God will fill us up with the graces we need. He will give us the charity that we seek. Friday afternoon, I was at work when my phone rang, and it was my cousin. And we had been close growing up and even into adulthood, although we had recently had some things happen that pulled us apart a bit and caused some distance. I was happy to receive her phone call, but I was kind of nervous. I'm like, oh my goodness, what does she want? When she got to the part about the reason for the call, she said simply, I'm calling because one of my Lenten resolutions was to personally reach out to people I haven't talked to in a while. I'm like, wow, what a great reason for your phone call. That is really nice. I don't think if it weren't for Lent, I would have heard from her in who knows how long, and it might have been a little bit awkward. But what a beautiful thing to do. A little bit later that same day, on Friday, I was talking to another friend, and he was telling me how his Lent was going. And he was talking about whether the 2 small meals were going to add up to the 1 meal he was planning on having later. And I'm like, well, that's great. I'm glad you're being really conscientious about that. But then I just thought to myself, as I compared the 2 events, I just thought to myself, I just liked the phone call from my cousin. I'm glad my one friend was being conscientious about the fasting. That's all important. But I just thought to myself, I just loved the outreach from my cousin. I just loved how her almsgiving, healed our relationship, and it put love where there had been a loss of love. And I think that's the goal. I think that's what Jesus is asking us for and showing us to do in Lent. I think there's a beautiful quote. I think it's St. John of the Cross who says, where there is no love, put love, and you will draw love out. And I love that, because there are so many places where there is not love in this world. There's people who are hurting. Maybe it's in ministries we're supporting. Maybe it's in our own families, people who are a lot closer to us, where it's just been that love has been lost a bit. So I'm going to try and do that this Lent a little bit. Where there is no love, put love, and you will draw love out. That was such a beautiful example of charity. Well, I apologize. I think I'm going to be done a little sooner than the kids are going to be back. So we can open it up to questions and answers and maybe have some dialogue. But I do want to close with a reflection on a poem. It's by W.H. Auden. Maybe you've heard of it before. It's Musée des Beaux-Arts. And he wrote it after he had been at a museum and had seen the painting of the Fall of Icarus. I don't know if you've ever seen that poem or that painting, but the story of Icarus is the boy who wanted to fly, and so he made himself wings, feathers, and then he put the feathers together with wax, and his father warned him, Icarus, if you don't do this, but if you do it, don't fly too close to the sun. This will be deadly for you. And so, of course, being a boy, Icarus doesn't really take heed of what his father told him. And as he is flying and feeling all of this wonderful freedom, he gets a little too close to the sun. And his wings, the wax in his wings melt, and he falls from the sky, and he drowns. And Auden saw a painting by Bruegel, actually. And the painting of Bruegel, it's a scene. It has like up close, it's a plowman plowing his fields. There's a horse kind of scratching his behind on a tree. There's a ship sailing on the water, and there's two little white legs sticking out of the ocean. And that's Icarus. He fell. I'm going to actually read the poem to you, and I just want to relate it to what we've been talking about this morning. So this poem is W.H. Auden. It's called Musée des Beaux-Arts. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position. How it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. How, when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course anyhow in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him, it was not an important failure. The sun shone, as it had to, on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. There's a lot of detachment there. I think while suffering is happening, so many people are oblivious to it. And I'll share with you, I read this actually at my mom's funeral because, again, she was just of the notion that attitude is everything. We have to understand our place in the world. The world doesn't revolve around us. We're here to give ourselves to others. We're here to serve others. And even though the tragedy of her death deeply affected her family and her friends and her loved ones, she knew that life would go on. Even though her death was like Icarus falling from the sky for us, she knew that ships would sail on and the plowman would keep plowing his fields. And yet, we have to not lose that reason in and of ourselves that what we are doing in attaching ourselves most closely to God is the most important thing. Her faith was the most important thing to her. And I am a very, very grateful recipient of her gift of faith. Very, very grateful for that. Interestingly, a little bit more about the poem. Children and animals are often oblivious to human suffering because they don't understand it. And so we can understand why they may be ignorant of the dreadful or miraculous events occurring within earshot or eyeshot of this scene of the fall of Icarus. But in the second stanza of the poem, we move away from this world of innocence. In the second stanza, Auden brings the adult world into focus while focusing on the fall of Icarus. So the tables are kind of turned. The people inhabiting the surroundings are no longer children or animals, but they are adults. The plowman, the expensive, delicate ship full of merchants or maybe important people that they must have seen what has taken place. So the subtle shift here in the poem signals a move from ignorance, not knowing what's going on, to indifference, not caring what is going on. I think as we continue or begin our Lenten journey, finish strong, everyone, finish strong. let's make sure that if we're ignorant, we take steps to make sure that we're not remaining that way, because we're adults and it's our job to form and teach those who are younger than we are, to carry on and to preserve and to maintain the great gift, the pearl of great price, which is our faith, our Catholic faith. We need to evangelize. We need to evangelize ourselves if we are not. We have to evangelize our families. We have to evangelize the world. And it may be costly. It may cost, it cost the Gerasenes 2,000 swine. It may cost you that. It may cost more, whatever that is, whatever your price, whatever is most precious to you. It may cost that. But we know that by uniting whatever it is that we have to suffer or give up, Jesus has been there and he has done that. And he is calling us to do the same, to follow him, to pick up our crosses and to not be ignorant, to educate ourselves. And then not only to not be ignorant, but to not be indifferent. Sometimes things can seem overwhelming, and we can say, I can't do anything about this problem. I can't do anything about human trafficking. I can't do anything about gender ideologies being all mixed up in the world. I can't do anything about the books that are in the public school system. I can't do anything about, whatever the situation may be. It's not true. You can. There's a lot that we can do. So I would encourage you to not be ignorant, not be indifferent, but today to renew your passion to be holy and to bring the love of Christ to others through our charity, and to be buoyed by our detachment from all created things for his sake this Lent. All right, that's all I've got. So I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I don't know if there's any coffee or donuts left. We can just mingle and chat. Okay, good. All right, I'm gonna take these off. I'm getting to that age where I'm needing assistance, but anyway. I'm sorry, you had a question? Go. Okay. Mhm. Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So. Mhm. Yes. Yes. That is absolutely absolutely true. Thank you for bringing that up. That's the question is, why aren't there groups who go into nursing homes to visit with people who are in nursing homes who are sick and who don't have people or family to visit them? It's something that's near and dear to my heart. My mom was a preschool teacher, and for whatever reason, I was not crazy about kids. I'm kind of amazed that I ended up with 6 of my own. But I love kids now. I love my own kids, and kids are great and they're a lot of fun. But when I was younger, before I was married, I just always had a heart for seniors. I just had a heart because I love to listen to stories, and they have so many stories to tell. And you can just sit there and you don't have to talk, you can just listen. And so I found that, as we all have our different charisms, gifts, and talents, some people are naturally drawn to children and some people are naturally drawn to seniors. Um, our school, the school where my kiddos go, St. John the Baptist in Jefferson, they do organize outings for the kids to go visit the seniors at Alden Estates in Jefferson. So they make them Valentines and they go over and deliver those. But what a great idea for an apostolate. I don't know of any, and maybe some of you do know of organizations that are already doing this, that are taking kids and going to visit seniors. But I think it's one of the best collaborative ideas out there. I 100% agree with you. I mean, our young people need to know what a treasure we have in the older generations. And the older generations, they have given and worked their whole entire lives. And it is just, oh my, yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, we are pro-life people as Catholics, and so we need to carry that through everything we do, from birth, natural birth to natural death. And my gosh, I don't know. Come talk to me about it. If anyone has any ideas, or if you have any connections about how something like that could be organized, that's definitely a really worthwhile apostolate. So I'm glad you were able to spend that time with your wife. Yeah. It's a crime. Yeah. Well, you know what? I'll get your address and we'll send her some mail. How about that? All right. Anybody else? Oh my goodness. Saint Therese of Lisieux was not an accident. I know she's a Carmelite, but then as I'm thinking back, Saint John of the Cross is another Carmelite, and who's the third? Yes, I did. Oh my goodness. Yes, indeed. Woohoo! Oh my gosh. See how that works? That's amazing. I wasn't intentional about that, but that's funny. You see, God works in those ways. I love it. Very good. Figuring out the mission. I agree. One thing I was thinking about as I was preparing this was how we can get down, or worried about whether I'm fulfilling my mission, oh, am I doing the right thing? And I probably should have added this, but I can add it now, so thank you. Everything works together for good for those who love him. So whether you're in prosperity, whether you're in poverty, whether you're in consolation, whether you're in desolation, give it up to the Lord. It's all a gift. He can use it. He can use our successes. He can use our failures. And what a great place to be, right? Like, what a great way to be detached, to know that he takes everything for good and for bad. And so, like, if this particular project bombs, or your meal burns, or your kid's acting up, or you don't have help, if you are uniting that to Christ, and especially through Mary, Jesus came to us through Mary. Shortest way to get back to Jesus is through Mary. Then don't worry about it. And what a great remedy for anxiety. like, okay, Lord, I think I'm screwing it all up. I think I'm messing it all up. I don't think I'm even doing the right thing that I'm supposed to be doing right now. But I don't know. So I'm just going to give it to you, and I'm just going to trust that, he will work it out. I came across a talk. It was, my daughter. asked me, we were driving home, and she asked me if I wanted to listen to a Chris Stefanick podcast. And I love Chris Stefanick. He's a great speaker, and she's 20 years old. So, of course, I'm like, yeah, sure. Sure, if you want to listen to Chris Stefanick, that'd be great, So she's not, she's strong in her faith, but I'm always like happy when she wants to share that with me. And anyway, his guest was Father Spitzer, I believe, Spritzer. He is the scientist. He is the guy who studies the origins of the universe, and he knows, like, he's gone head to head with Stephen Hawking, and he knows that, like, mathematically, if anything in the universe were off by like 10 by the hundredth by the hundredth by the hundredth exponent, we wouldn't be here. The precision with which the universe was created, the detail, just the chances of this world existing and not being collapsed in the universe, or frozen or burned by the sun, it's unimaginable. He likened it to an ape basically sitting down at a typewriter and typing out all of Shakespeare's plays word for word with no mistakes on the first try. That's how implausible and improbable it is that we have life here on earth. And then you look at the human being and the complexity and the miraculousness of the human person. And, you think of an everyday miracle, like being a birth. Oh my gosh, it's kind of mind-blowing. So when you think about that exquisite care that God has for us, that we are even here, that we have this beautiful world, that is something that can really give us hope when we're feeling discouraged or anxious about what we're supposed to be doing. He's in control. He really is. Anybody else? Anyone else? Oh, yeah. You
were talking about that. Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son. That makes you think that the young man in the gospel said, "What? I do this and this and this and this. What else do I need to do? So you have to sell everything to get it forth." He didn't do that. But yet, Jesus didn't ask that of Peter. Peter had a house. Peter had a home and a wife. Mm-hmm. He didn't ask it of his friends Lazarus and Mary and Martha. They had a home because they probably they were not. It wasn't that important to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Detachment. It's very interesting. And, everything that we have, like, perhaps they were using it in the way that the Lord needed them to use it. So, it's not as though we have to give up everything we have for, just to give it up. But it's how are we using what we do have? How are you using your goods? How are you using your marriage? Is your marriage a gift? How are you using your education? How are you using these things, whatever created or uncreated thing that you have? Your health. How are you using the gift of your health? Your sickness. How are you using the gift of your sickness? Your sorrow, your dysfunction. How are you using those gifts? Because everything, all good things come from God. And he turns, all good, what is it? Romans 8. Everything works for good for those who love him. All good things work for the good for those who love him. So don't let anything deter you. Nothing should really deter us, because if we have it, we need to use it. Good, bad, ugly, beautiful. So, yeah, and like I said before, maybe he's not calling you to actually give those things up. He just wants to know our hearts. Are we willing? Who's first in our hearts? And as I was talking about my mom, I'm like, gosh, I was really attached to her. Is that a bad attachment? No, of course not. But I don't know the future. I remember saying, I thought the best thing for her would be to stay here with us a little longer. I was only 33 when she passed away and could have used her a little bit more. But God must have had something better in mind. He knows all things. He's omniscient. He's all powerful. He's omniscient. He must have had something better than that in mind. So it's probably my first question when I get to the pearly gates, God willing. Like, So. All right, anybody else? Otherwise, I'm just happy to mingle or, yeah, there's coffee and donuts. And I think we've got 15 minutes of peace before the kids come back. So Grace Marie said it's like a hard stop when the kids come back. And I know how that goes. They're going to be like coming back. But thank you again for having me. This was really a joy and a pleasure to be here.